You've entered BOOKSTORM with Kristen Civiletto and me, Chris Storm. This is a podcast devoted to best-selling books that matter, books that make a difference. We're diving down deep with beloved authors about their stories. We're exposing hot-button topics and heartfelt themes, the issues that affect each of us in our own lives, as siblings, parents, partners, friends, as human beings. We're braving new ideas, fresh thoughts, hard lessons, and important truths. Those kinds of things that stay with us long after we turn the last page and close the book. Welcome back to BOOKSTORM Podcast. All book lovers like Kristen and I, we're super excited to let you know who we have with us today. Many of you have written in because you love the author, Maisey Yates, who is a New York Times bestselling author of, now wait for it, over 100 romance novels. Maisey, welcome with us here today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited.
So we have a special surprise, though, listeners, and for anyone on YouTube. We have Maisey with us today, but we have her as Ellie Banks because she has written this fabulous story, little different genre than the romance that you're used to, called One Little Spark. And we're here to talk about that book today. Let me tell you a little bit more about her in case you don't know. Whether she's writing strong, hardworking cowboys, dissolute princes, or multi-generational family stories, did you know that Maisey loves getting lost in fictional worlds? Did you know that she's an avid knitter? That's something I envy. I envy that. I don't have the fine manipulation, fine hand skills to be able to do that, but it's a wonderful hobby. She has a dangerous yarn addiction. This is what she says on her bio, that I laughed at that. And yes, same as Kristen and I, an aversion to housework. Who doesn't? Yes, we're with you there, Maisey. She lives with her husband and 3 kids in rural Oregon. We're going to call her Maisey for the interview today, even though we've got this cool pseudonym, Ellie Banks. And could you give us a little side story how you chose this pseudonym?
So my middle name's Elizabeth, and honestly, I feel like Elizabeth is a little long. And so I went with Ellie, which is funny. My childhood best friend is also named Ellie, which is kind of fun. Her name is also Elizabeth. My middle name's Elizabeth. And so wanted to get a little bit of a relation to me personally. And I just like Ellie better than some of the other nicknames you get off of Elizabeth. And Banks, I liked the way that it sounded, and I was tired of being at the end of the alphabet. So that's my very honest one. But then also I was thinking there's a vague relationship to Mary Poppins, and it's kind of a funny thing. My mom loved that movie, and so there's just something about that makes me kind of happy, because I'm like, oh, that kind of relates to my mom. But primarily I was like, I'm tired of being on the bottom at the end of everything. So
it's funny. I was going to say to you, did that have anything to do with that Banks from Mary Poppins? Because we love the whole Banks family, and that's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's, well, I thought of that too. So,
well, welcome. We're so happy to have you with us today.
My middle name is Elizabeth as well, so we have a nice connection here.
It's a good middle name. It's like a good, like, it kind of props everything up, you know.
Well, Maisey, we love to give our listeners a little bit of the background on the story. So if you'll allow me, I will not give away any spoilers, but I'll just tell them a little bit about it. And I would love at the end, if you want to jump in and add anything, you just let me know. But in your story, One Little Spark, which was very exciting with some twists and turns. So again, I got to be a little more general. A fire devastates a portion of a small town. And we have 4 women who are trying to put the pieces of their life back together. And as they learn more about the fire, as an investigation unravels, we have secrets and doubts relating to the people that they love, even the people that they are. And you asked the question, I think, do we ever truly know the people that we love and we trust? Do we even always know ourselves? Very briefly, I want to tell our listeners about your 4 characters. And again, I'm going to keep it general because there's so many cool connections here. First of all, Jenna, her life had already exploded before the fire, Her husband had left her for a much younger pregnant girlfriend, and he is now among the missing. We have Chelsea. Her husband is also among the missing, but she has never acknowledged or explored some nagging doubts that she has. And now that the fire has happened, this is now causing something to unravel even in her. Morgan, she's a single mom who knows some very dark things about some of the other people living in the town, but she's been treated a little bit like an outsider since she's arrived. We have Alex, who doesn't remember anything from the day of the fire. She doesn't remember or know why she was found wandering on a rural road. She wonders why she has dreams of standing in the middle of a fire with matches in her hand. But all of these women's stories come together and combust, if you will, in some incredibly interesting and fascinating ways. Did you want to go ahead and add anything or correct
Yeah.
me?
So in September, it was September 8th, 2020, there were two towns in my county in Oregon that burned down when there was a fire that started on a freeway entrance, like near the freeway entrance, and it burned 8 miles straight down the interstate. And it was incredibly devastating. And I did what, all normal people do, well, normal writers do. How do you process something like that? It's tragic. There were 80% of the kids in one of the schools were homeless at that point. And this was during COVID school closures as well. So they actually had to open the schools because there was nowhere for anyone to go. And people had to go all stay together in a building. There was no option to distance or anything like that. We suddenly had an emergency that was like so immediate that we had all these people without shelter, and that had to kind of take precedence over everything else. And so it was an incredibly disruptive event. And we were under an evacuation order as well where I live, but we ended up being totally fine. But it was one of those things where we had a fire burning right over the mountain in California. We had the one that was burning in the towns. And so all of our escape routes were really iffy because we are rural. So we've got like a couple of options to try to drive somewhere. And I was not unaffected by that. I don't think that you can kind of go through something like that, even adjacent to it, and not be somewhat affected by it. And then driving through the aftermath of it, frequently as I kind of go about driving between different towns and all of that, I was just really struck by, it was actually seeing a sign. I believe the book in the present opens with her reading a sign about we're rebuilding your community. And it was kind of thinking that that would be an interesting framework for a story and the kinds of things that fire can hide and the kinds of things that it reveals. And it's, I'm always interested in stories about people's lives. And so this was just kind of an interesting angle to come at the kind of story that honestly I already tell in my women's fiction and in my romance, but with more of a suspense element in it.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, that's what gives your story such a depth is your characters processing not just this tragedy, but all the things it unearths. And excellent. Well, with that, Chris is going to kick us off if you're ready to jump in and dive into the storm with us.
Yes, we sure are. And I just want to say for our readers and listeners, I truly loved and thoroughly enjoyed this story. It's deeply emotional, self-exploring, intimate, surrounding 3 very different yet similar women friends. And I love these characters. I'm going to say thank you to these characters who became real to the reader. Jenna, Chelsea, Alex, and even Morgan, for showing us how to fight back and escape our past life experiences, trauma, circumstances. What does it take for us to become who we want to be, who we were meant to be or choose to be? At one point, Jenna looked at one of her past, I'm going to quote, she called monsters, full in the face. And she said, "It has lost its power over me." Wow. Could you expand as the writer on the importance of all of us, even in the real world, facing our hurt, our fear, our pain, and refusing to be a byproduct of those wounds?
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things about, and this isn't a spoiler to me, about having Jenna and Morgan both as point of view characters in the same book is that, Morgan is the other woman and is part of I don't even want to say she's the reason Jenna's marriage broke up, because I think we know that is kind of on her husband, but it was complicated to have to kind of figure out how, as a writer, to sympathize with both of them completely. And I think it's, to me, it's like they both had to let go kind of for their own sake. And I think, I'm sorry, I'm distracted because my dog is freaking out. I have a Chiweenie, and like, talk about barking, because they're half dachshund, half Chihuahua. So they never stop. Anyway,
we can't hear him. I can't.
Oh, that's
we can't
good.
hear.
I'm glad you can't. She's just going off over there, but that's fine.
And don't worry, we have everything coming through. Our listeners know we've had cats, dogs, birds, ambulance, toilet flushing once.
A trumpet. Once a trumpet.
Oh, a trumpet's a good one. Yeah.
In a New York City high rise.
Oh, okay. That's pretty impressive. I don't have any of that. Just dogs that get incredibly startled by everything. They're like, oh my gosh, it's a noise. It's a noise. But she's the worst one. So she made me lose my train of thought. But yeah, I think with Jenna specifically, when she does have to kind of face down the things she's built up in her head, it's like she has to look at this other woman and recognize that, like, there's no power there unless you give it to her. And it's like, it's keeping you from living your life. And I think with both Jenna and Morgan, it was like Jenna was so entitled to her anger. And I didn't feel like Jenna had to forgive Morgan, even though, I really sympathized with Morgan also, because I made her up, and I know not everyone will, and that's fine. But I had to, in order to write her. And I think, but I also felt really strongly Jenna didn't have to forgive her for Morgan's sake, but Jenna needed to do it for her own sake, or just let go, because it wasn't, when she was really honest with herself, she didn't envy what the other person was going through, and it didn't benefit her in any way to hang on to that anger, even though it was justified. And I think that is one of the hardest things in life, when you know that you are angry for a really good reason, but it doesn't matter. It's not serving you. It's not giving you anything. And that's why you have to let it go. Not because the other person deserves your forgiveness, but because you at a certain point have to go, when do I stop allowing them to hurt me? And I think that was why Jenna's journey was so important to me. And, I have other thoughts too about how I don't think Morgan has to live in the shame of the mistake that she made for her entire life. But I think that, that to focus just on Jenna, it's like, she doesn't owe anyone else anything, but she owes herself the chance to kind of move forward and move on.
Mm-hmm. And, I'm a very big believer in that too. I almost look at that like you're carrying a huge weight on your shoulders. And why are you carrying it around anymore? Because you just want to feel that anger. You want to be mad. But what you don't realize, if you just drop it, it doesn't mean what they did is okay. It just means I'm not going to carry this weight around. And before we got started, I was saying to Kristen, I like what you did with Morgan, the other woman. Did something very difficult, very challenging, by showing us who she was as a real person. This is not an easy feat, because we want to hate her, but you're showing us she's a person just like all of us. This is such a life lesson, how easy it is for us to come in the 11th hour and judge someone without having known everything that they'd walk through. It spoke to women everywhere, all women empowerment, women supporting and understanding women. And I'm going to thank you for that, because it was not an easy thing, I'm sure.
No. And I really felt strongly about the fact that so much of the story is like, whose perspective are you in? And I don't just mean that literally in the book, but when we are telling ourselves stories about our own lives, the way that we can justify our own actions as essential for us. And I think, Morgan did that. I think Ryan, Jenna's husband, did that. And I think, people were more and less at fault in that situation. Like, I definitely, and even just the way that we do kind of hold, I think she was 19 when she started a relationship with him, that she would be held equally accountable to somebody in his 40s
Mhm.
or, you know, for that. And and somebody who is the one who made the commitment to the marriage, and she's kind of an outsider coming in and has no attachment to anyone. She just knows her own problems. And so, you know, it is kind of a look at the way we can rewrite things in our head to justify it. And then, you know, she had to kind of live in the consequences. But I think, you know, it was really important to me to show where and how we allocate blame for things like that. And the way that, even though I don't feel like her and Jenna will ever be like friends, that it is that kind of releasing hold of the anger so that they can move on because their kids are half siblings and all these kinds of things. And so I think that was, yeah, it was challenging, but it was fun to be like, well, they're not like besties. I think that's like, you know, a bridge too far. They're not even the same age. So it's like, they're not, you know, but I think to show that they could, that there's like forgiveness even without like that full, like, oh, she's my best friend now. Or like, I didn't want it to feel inauthentic.
Yeah.
But I wanted them both, I wanted the reader to believe that they could both move forward and have a really good life and that they both deserved that.
And you succeeded. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Maisey, several of your characters experience what experts refer to as complicated grief. And it, you know, it happens when a person loses someone that they love or once loved and feel loss. But also when they lost that person, they might have also been experiencing, you know, anger, betrayal, confusion, or disbelief. And I'm thinking a lot of people experience these seemingly contradictory feelings of grief and anger. And certainly anyone who's lost an ex-spouse or anybody who has a fractured relationship with a parent and then loses the parent. But we don't hear a lot about this term. And as somebody who has experienced this, I wanted to see if you could just comment on this a little bit.
Yeah, I think it is human nature in general to want things to be really neat. Like if someone does a bad thing, then you're not supposed to care about them anymore, or you're supposed to cut them off. Like Morgan is an example of a complicated person. Someone does something bad and we want them to be a villain, but she's not going to fall into that role. She isn't going to be the stereotype of, you know, kind of a young predatory woman who has come in and like seduced a married man away. She's more complicated than that. And that is the thing that I am fascinated by as a writer, is the way that we want things to be neat. We want there to be like when celebrities divorce, right? You want there to be a good guy and a bad guy. Or when even people, you know, divorce, you want there to be a good guy and a bad guy. And it's like, there's often not. There's just complicated people who have along the way made choices that are a little bit deeper than that. And I think grief is the same thing. You know, we want to believe that, you know, that for Jenna, that she could write her husband off, her ex-husband, because he betrayed her, but he's the father of her children. She has to watch her children grieve. She is still grieving the loss of the relationship. She's grieving the loss of kind of how the kids are able to see him and where they were at when he died, that she never got the chance to be in a better place with him, that, you know, she feels guilty that maybe she held her kids back from having time with him because they were justifiably angry at him as well, because he was the one that had an affair and he was the one that broke up the relationship. And so to me, that's fascinating, because I think that we have to resist the urge to make things simple and let ourselves kind of sit in the complication. And that's one of the hardest things to do as people. But I think that is one of the most important things that I explore ever in my work, is that people are complicated and they're not defined by one good or bad thing that they do. And then so too, our grief at losing people is going to be complicated. Because relationships are always deeper and more layered than they appear to be. And so, yeah, that's the only kind of feeling I'm interested in, is that complicated, you know, they're always double-edged swords, I think.
Absolutely. And, you know, I almost wish that people could deal with one another with understanding along those lines, and deal with people in their complication and their complicated relationships, because you're right. We do want things to be neat. Oh, that's your ex-husband? Well, then you should be happy.
Yes.
You're done. You don't care what happens to him. That's not true. And so I just feel like that was a theme we don't often see in fiction. And so I was really glad that you addressed it. I think there's a lot of people who identify with it.
Definitely. That's what I loved about this story, is that we can find a little of ourselves in almost every single one of these characters. And that's the beauty of fiction. You think you're reading a fantasy story, but it's really built on everything that you, as the author, have felt and seen and known to be true. And you're bringing it to light for all of us to consider, maybe something we hadn't thought of. And that's what I loved about this book. I want to talk a little bit about the book title, because it's perfect in so many ways. One little spark ignited a fire. Chelsea thought that was what fire was for. It burned everything away and left the ground bare. It left you able to start over. And I wondered, as the writer, could you give us a little more, expand upon what did it take for these women to face the truth about their current dissatisfaction and unhappiness? What does it take for all of us to find the courage to admit we're not content, the courage to use the power we do have to change our lives?
I think it's a good example of people who maybe haven't examined their unhappiness until something catastrophic happens. And I think that, again, is another thing that is just human nature. We don't want to let go of the thing that we have, the thing that we know, that we have, in order to reach for something that we may not be able to get. And I think that is what suspends people in a state of unhappiness for a very long time. And I think in general, it required some like drastic things to happen in order for them to shake things up. It was like the fire had to kind of burn it all down to get really deep into the literal and the metaphorical of it all. Because Chelsea, when she really looked back, she wasn't having a deep kind of happy marriage. She was really kind of coasting through it. And there were things that were not right, but it did take his infidelity to kind of make her go, oh, and to kind of look for something that was better and that suited her better. And I think it was the same with Chelsea. She had to kind of her husband had to leave for her to go, oh, well, like, this is like a come to Jesus moment. I can't sit here in the silence and in the kind of discontent. I actually have to address something. And I think, I think Morgan was always living in something a little bit less perfect. She was kind of living in change the whole time. And I think that's really down to her age. She was the other three women were older, so they were more settled in their lives. And I think Alex definitely buried, and I'm going to try not to give any spoilers about her relationship. Like, she definitely buried her stuff so deep that without something catastrophic, she was never going to address it. And I think that is just, hopefully we don't need catastrophic things to kind of sit back and evaluate our lives. But I think so often it is because we are always torn between that desire for safety and that desire for potentially like something better, but we don't really know because it's over the hill and you would have to move away from the other thing. And so I think we're always caught between those things as well. It's like safety and happiness. And I think sometimes we're afraid we can't have both. But I think, this book is kind of hopefully showing people that you can lean on your own strength and the strength of the women around you. And things don't need to be kind of in perfect order for you to make those moves, and for you to really to challenge yourself and your life, and to kind of move into the next better thing.
Mm-hmm. I really loved it. And it spoke to not only relationships, but maybe career moves or maybe physical move from one city to another. And you really did show that sometimes our fear of the unknown is too great. So we tolerate our discontent. And it's like that saying, out of the frying pan and into the fire. Well, you're worried that what if it isn't any better? Well, I guess you got to reach a certain point where this is not good enough right here. And I've got to take the risk. And your character sort of laid that out for us and showed us, it sort of gave you the empowerment to go for it. Go ahead. I really loved it. Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to press into that theme just a little bit more, because one of your characters has to reassess the state of her marriage now that a child is out of the house. And, we hear about empty nest syndrome, but what is it about children leaving that forces people to now look at their relationship with their spouse and reevaluate things? Because I'm wondering if that's the time where regret kind of catches up to you. What do you think?
I think so. I think there's like layers to it. And I say this as someone who does not have an empty nest. My oldest is 17, so it's coming. I mean, well, one of them will be, heading out, but I hear they always come back. But it's, just from thinking about it, because I think, one of the things you have to do as a writer is sit down and go, why is that? Like, why is this a phenomenon that we see across kind of humanity when you haven't experienced something yourself? You kind of have to sit and really mine your empathy, I think. But to me, it is where I think particularly for women, a lot of regret can come up, because when your children have needed you in a certain capacity for a number of years, and you have had a lot of the kind of emotional and physical labor is often on women, not always. My husband's a stay-at-home dad, so this is, really more about things that I've seen other people go through. You deferred a lot of the things that you wanted to do, and suddenly, you're not needed in the same way, and you're sitting there kind of evaluating what that looks like. And maybe your spouse doesn't catch up with the kind of, well, there's not kids around, so they're also not being shielded by the kind of other movement happening in the house, by the distraction. There's really no buffer between you and your spouse anymore. And if you have fallen into the kind of relationship where what you talk about is what your kids did today, where that is what you focus on, is what is the kids' schedule, what is going on with the kids, and you haven't like really stopped and looked at that other person across the table because you were so busy looking at the children sitting between you, I think that can be really difficult, because it's like, oh, I know I relate to you in this context where we are more focused on dealing with the smaller humans in our house than we are with each other. And so I think there's a lot of layers to that. I think it can be, the frustration of your own kind of deferred goals and dreams. I think it can be just not knowing how to talk to each other anymore. And it can also be that without those distractions, I think a light can shine on certain things that you were willing to ignore when you were busy, when, it was like, well, he's a good dad. Maybe not a great partner, but a good dad. And when that's not really what you need every day, I think those things can crop up. And so that's where, I think that's where things can kind of start to unravel.
Yeah, I think that's excellent. In fact, I always wondered if couples should prepare for that juncture in advance. Like, we have college planning, we're focused on the child, we're thinking about the financial end, but maybe a big part of that also needs to be that relational end of who's left in the house.
Yeah,
even other
and
children, we've redefinition of relationships.
yeah. And I think that that kind of really goes with all the other points about the book, where it's like a certain level of awareness for what's happening in your life, what's happening in your home, what's happening in your relationships, is that's the thing that prevents the spark. Like, not the good kind of spark. You want to have a spark in your marriage, but like, it's the thing that prevents the kind of spark that we have in the book that creates a catastrophic fire. Is, do you ignore because you don't want to make waves, and do you let it build and build and build and build until it becomes this like untenable situation that has to explode? Or do you honestly and with kind of rigor examine what's happening around you, so that you can go, hey, like, this doesn't seem right. I feel like this isn't working. Like, what's going on with you, whether that's in friendships, whether that's in relationships with your kids, or in a relationship with your spouse. And that's kind of what I think is that, just even acknowledging that that is a thing that could happen to you. Like, hey, our kids are going to move out. What's that going to look like? I think is the beginning of kind of getting ahead of that stuff.
Wise words.
Very wise. I'm an empty nester. My kids are gone. When they left, I was like, yes, this is sorry, kids. You know, I love you. But it can be a really wonderful thing. But yeah, wisdom, lots of wisdom. Okay. Now, I don't think this is a spoiler. Tell me if it is, but I have to quote the last line in the book. It's okay.
Yeah. Go right
I
ahead.
loved it so much. I just want to make a plaque with this on it, or greeting card, or I don't know. You need to print this off in a lot of different ways. To confident women, loud women, women who don't stay quiet to make people comfortable, women who don't ignore that feeling in their gut, women who believe in themselves and each other. Cheers to that, Maisey. Loved it.
That, I mean, I think that goes without saying too, that it's another huge theme in the book, because we did have women with complicated relationships with the people around them and with each other, and who had made different mistakes. But at the end of the day, it's about not allowing kind of the men in the situation to bypass blame by casting it on to women. It's about what can happen when women don't allow themselves to be gaslit and silenced. It's about what happens when we actually band together instead of refusing, like instead of being divided. And I think, that is so important to me. And I think, that we do lift each other up. And I think Jenna, particularly for me, was a character that I really related to, not anything that was happening in her life, but the idea of being a loud woman with a strong voice, and being someone who, you have really good intentions, and people are almost determined to see it as a bad thing because you don't do it softly, because you don't know how to tone yourself down, and because you're passionate, and it can be kind of perceived in these other ways. Whereas with men, I feel like they're usually assets. And my dear friend, Megan Crane, who's also an amazing writer, writes under multiple names. She always says, when people say that you're very confident and you're a woman, it's never a compliment. And I think I put that exactly into the book, because that is something that has really resonated with me. I came into the publishing industry young and confident, and met with mixed results there. So I think, for me, that was something that really writing about women using their voices and how silencing us does not benefit us was really important to me. So I'm glad that resonated with you.
Just loved it. Really loved it. So can you give us a clue before we let you go? What's on your radar? What are you working on next?
So I actually just finished editing my next Ellie Banks thriller, and I wish that I had a title, but I don't have one yet. So I can't give you a title, but it'll be out next May, because they do come out basically a year apart from each other. And this one is a little bit different because it is about one woman primarily, and she her husband left her and disappeared with her child. And her name is Margot, and she's a true crime writer. And so what she does is write about these kinds of horrible things that happen to other people. And this is about her kind of unraveling the things that she missed in her own life, in her quest to find her daughter, and to uncover the mystery of what happened to a girl who disappeared in their town 18 years earlier that she was friends with. And it's another study in, I think, complicated grief, and in relentless women, because to me, those are things that really interest me. And it was cool to get to go really deep into Margot's head and into her story, and really focus on kind of the one thing. But it was very different for me. I don't usually do single point of view books. And but that'll be coming up next year. And then just immediately after One Little Spark will be another Maisey Yates romance in July called The Rough Rider, which is about cowboys, totally different tone. But one of my favorite heroes ever, Gus McLeod. So people can look forward to that one. And I'm just starting work on, now that I've turned in the edits for the other Ellie Banks, on another Four Corners romance, which is part of my cowboy series. So always busy, and always about 100 things coming down the pipeline.
And we're so happy that you are so busy because we got the product and these beautiful stories. And I want to say to our readers, definitely get this. Ellie Banks, One Little Spark. It's entertaining, it's fun, but guess what else? It's a book that matters. It inspires, it can change your life. We absolutely loved it. And in the meantime, connect with Maisey Yates, aka Ellie Banks. She has a website, she's on Facebook, she's on Instagram, and it's been a lot of fun talking to you today. Lots of fun.
Really fun. Thank you so much.
Thank you so
Thanks
much,
so
Maisey.
much for joining us.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
That is a lot to talk about in one novel. So many things just hit so hard and right at home. I love this idea of the women empowerment and that last sentence in her book. I just feel like women sometimes, even in the business world and in the world today, we are still somewhat of a minority, persecuted against, maybe not taken totally seriously for whatever reason, physical strength, intelligence, whatever reason that women could be persecuted today. And I don't think women, we band together enough. We've seen a lot of it in this fiction, and we've seen a lot of it with co-female authors who found each other across the country and are writing stories that matter. But I love this idea of women empowerment and women supporting each other.
Yeah, that really hit close to home because, I'm in a field that when I at least started was very male dominated. And I was in a practice area that was only men. And first of all, I remember very clear, I'll never forget this. I had a senior attorney at a place where I was a summer clerk tell me, well, women litigators, they're either super bitches or they're not very good at what they do. Yeah, there was no in between for him. He had kind of categorized women this way. And I remember also during that same time period that the women who were as litigators, moving up the ranks, becoming partners, there were only a couple, they weren't particularly helpful to the younger women coming up behind them. I think the attitude was, well, we had to go through the hard work. You can put that time in too. And so I've often thought about what you just said, that had 30 years ago women reached out and extended that hand and let me mentor you, it would have been, I think, a very different environment. I don't know.
I would hope, and I do believe that we've come a long way since that time, and that women are supporting women, and that we are in a different world today. I just got to believe it, and I think that we're headed that way. We're aware of it. We're aware of our power, our empowerment, our intelligence, our gifts, our abilities, and I see women doing amazing things, and I just love it. I wanted to ask you this question. I have so many comments, and I know we can't go through them. What about this little theme working through the book? Can you hate what someone did, but still love them? And how do you do that? Any experience?
Yeah, that was a great theme. And she likes to explore the complications of our emotions, of who we are as people. And to me, that speaks to the maturity that you need to be in relationships with other people. We have to understand that everything is not black and white. We cannot be judgmental because of one choice that someone makes, but that doesn't mean we accept what they do. And to me, that is why you have to have boundaries, right? Because if somebody's behavior is out of line, crossing the line, you can still love them, but from afar.
That's a great, I love that you said boundaries, because I wanted to bring that word in, that yes, you can still love someone, but you can put up a boundary for your own mental, physical, emotional well-being. I like that. Okay, I got one more. This quote, someone said in the book, it's nice to be able to take care of someone. And I thought, okay, now wait a minute. Is this what some people look for in a relationship? Do some partners need to be the bigger, stronger savior in order to make them feel adequate? But what does that do to the other partner? Okay, so yes, we all want to take care of each other, but when taking care of someone becomes your main reason for a relationship, I'm going to guess here that it's not a healthy one.
I don't know. I mean, maybe unless two people are on board with that, that could work for them. But, that discounts the fact that people grow and they change, and that experiences come along that cause them to reevaluate. Do I want to be better or different? I'm not sure. And
Do you,
and to me, that also ties in with the complications that we've been talking about throughout the themes of this book. In fact, I want to kind of ask you about that. We talked about complicated grief. And I was wondering if that was a term that you were familiar with. If is that something that you may have thought about?
very much so. I'm a very big believer um, that we lose someone. And a lot of times I've seen this happen in my own personal family. Someone passes away, and all of a sudden, my extended big family places this person on a little mini pedestal. Oh, they died. We loved them. They were so great. And I'm thinking, no, they weren't. They weren't really all that great, but we still miss them. And there's still things about them that we wish we were there. I guess this is where grief gets complicated. It's not cut and dry. I'm talking about death here. It could be grief at the loss of a relationship, grief at the loss of a dream. Um, but it's like Maisey said, relationships and people are so multi-layered, complicated, that it doesn't just come down to cut and dry. This happened and I'm hurting. And let me also say that grief can look different for each one of us. I've had two friends in the past 4 years who've lost their husband. Each is dealing with it in a very, very different way. Is one way right and one way wrong? No. And one of them came to say to me, do you think that what I'm doing is still okay? And I said, listen, I can't judge your grief. You have to deal with that grief in whatever way that you think is appropriate and able for you to get through it, push through it. My only complaint would have been if I see someone lingering in that grief and not able to escape it in any way, then I may approach them and say, maybe now is the time that you should get some coping skills, some professional help with that grief. But it is a very tough area. And to sit here and judge anyone else's grief, no possible way. I won't ever do it. How
Well,
about you,
this goes
Kristen?
back to well, it goes back to your question a few seconds ago, and that is, can we simultaneously have feelings of anger and missing someone or confusion and missing someone? And I think that answer is yes. And recognizing that maybe is that first step to starting to process grief, grieving a relationship or grieving the loss of someone. And I think that term complicated grief is one that maybe we need to talk about it more, because a lot of people have confusion after the loss of something because they don't recognize that you can have simultaneous feelings, like you were just asking about a minute ago.
And there's so many layers to grief, as we know, according to the charts. You go through anger and then denial and then all through these things. So it is a topic that has been studied to a great degree. But even having said that, it's okay for your grief to look different. And it's not okay for someone else to question your grief path.
Yeah. And also recognize that it's simultaneous. That's what was so interesting about your question you asked, because, we think about grief being, well, this stage and then this stage and then the anger stage. I don't think it's always that way. Sometimes it's simultaneously, I love and hate this person.
Absolutely. That's good. There's so many great things in this book. One Little Spark by Ellie Banks. I mean, I just really loved it. Thought about it for a good while after it was done. Can't wait to see what Maisey Yates, AKA Ellie Banks, has next. And in the meantime, I want to say, listeners, thank you for joining us. We're so excited to have all of you. 980 cities or something and 58 countries. And I don't know where we are. We're literally, I like to use that word when it's appropriate, all over the world. And it's because of these talented authors and all book lovers everywhere that Kristen and I get to do what we love to do, bring you great fiction. Guess what we're bringing you next? Just stay tuned. We've got Crispo Jollian and the paperback release of The Lioness, Madeline Martin, The Keeper of Hidden Books, Bryn Turnbull, Paris Deception, Katie Quinn and Janie Chang, The Phoenix Crown, Heather Gudenkoff, The Overnight Guest, Matthew Quirk, Inside Threat, Kate White, Between Two Strangers, Nikki Ehrlich, The Measure, and Juan Gabriel Vasquez, Retrospective.
Oh, I can't wait to talk about those. And listeners, please continue to share our socials. We love having these kinds of in depth discussions about matters that affect all of us, and maybe not all at once, but certainly at points in our lives. So stay on the radar with us. You can visit our website at bookstormpodcast.com. You can find us on Twitter, on Instagram, on TikTok. You can see us in person and some of our amazing authors if you find us on YouTube. Just search for Bookstorm and Podcast. Till next time, one of the best ways to brave the storm is to dive down deep into life-changing fiction.